I knew something was wrong the moment my bank asked if my daughter was available to speak for me. It was a Tuesday morning, a little after 9. I was standing in my kitchen in my own house, holding my own phone, asking about a pharmacy charge I didn't recognize. The woman on the line sounded polite in that careful, overtrained way people do when they think they're helping. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett," she said, "but Melissa usually handles these questions for you." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "My daughter does not handle anything for me," I said. "I'm calling about my account." There was a pause. I heard keys clicking. Then she said, even softer, "She's listed as your primary contact on the household checking, and there's a note here to direct most questions to her first." I stared at the coffee maker while she talked. I had not put that note there. My daughter had not asked me if she could put that note there. And suddenly I wasn't calling about one pharmacy charge anymore. I was hearing something much bigger. Someone had started speaking for me in places that were supposed to belong to me. My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 72 years old, and for 31 years I worked as a paralegal in an elder law office in Arizona. Probate, guardianship, powers of attorney, estate cleanup, trust disputes, capacity questions. I spent half my adult life watching families turn, or just helping, into something ugly. The second money, property, or control got close enough to smell. I was never an attorney. I was the woman behind the files, the woman who knew where to look when a son suddenly cared too much about a mother's medication records, the woman who knew that adult children rarely start with the house. They start with access, then paperwork, then language, then authority. By the time the house comes up, the groundwork has usually already been laid. That Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen with my coffee going cold beside me, I realized my daughter and her husband had stepped past help and into preparation. The worst part was, it hadn't started that day, not even close. It started 3 years earlier with a sentence I should have challenged harder. "Just for a little while, Mom." That was Melissa, my daughter. She and her husband Kyle were behind on everything and ashamed enough to call it temporary. Kyle had left some job he claimed wasn't worth his talent. Melissa was working full-time at a dental office and looked tired in a way that made her seem older and younger at the same time. They needed a place to stay for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, until they got on their feet. My husband Frank had been dead for 4 years by then. The house was too quiet sometimes. Melissa was still my child. So yes, I let them move into the guest room. At first it felt like family. Melissa bought groceries. Kyle carried heavier boxes without being asked. He changed a dead porch bulb. He fixed a gate latch that had been sticking for months. They said thank you too often and moved around me gently, like people who still remembered they were guests. Then time passed, and guests slowly became fixtures. The guest room turned into 2 rooms. Then the little office off the hall became Kyle's workspace. Then packages started showing up under his name. Then there were boxes in the garage. Then I heard him refer to my house as our place on the phone one afternoon and tell a friend, "We've put a lot into this house already." That last part was funny in a way that would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. Kyle's biggest contribution to the property had been overcooking hamburgers on my patio grill and teaching my daughter to keep Amazon boxes out of sight before I came home from grocery runs. But those weren't the real problems. The real problems came in smaller ways. He started answering questions no one had asked him. If a repairman came, Kyle met him at the door. If I had a doctor's appointment, Kyle suddenly had opinions about timing and routes, and whether I should really be driving. If the mail came, he sorted it first, so you don't have to mess with junk. If I left a bill on the counter, It vanished into a pile Melissa said she was organizing for me. That phrase came up a lot. For you. We're doing this for you. We already handled that for you. You don't need to worry about that anymore. People think control sounds cruel when it arrives. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it sounds efficient. For a while, I let too much of it slide, partly because I loved my daughter, partly because grief had made me more tired than I liked admitting, and partly because Melissa had this way of smoothing every ugly edge before I could grab it. If Kyle was rude, she called him stressed. If he overstepped, she called him proactive. If he spoke for me, she said he was only trying to make things easier. My daughter had spent years turning his flaws into milder weather. I think she had to. It was the only way she knew how to live beside him. The first moment that truly rattled me happened at my cardiologist's office. I had gone in for a follow-up after a medication adjustment. Nothing dramatic, just age catching up in its usual boring ways. Blood pressure, prescriptions, routine questions. Melissa offered to take me. Kyle insisted on driving. We're all headed that way anyway, he said, which wasn't true, but I let it go. At the clinic, when the nurse called my name, Kyle stood up too. I'm good, I said. You two can wait out here. Melissa hesitated. Kyle smiled the way men smile when they have already decided your answer for you. We'll just come back, he said. It's easier. For whom? I almost asked. Inside the exam room, the nurse went through the usual checklist. Meds, symptoms, changes since last visit. Then she glanced at her tablet and asked, Any confusion in the evenings lately? Trouble remembering names or keeping track of medications? I looked at her. No. She frowned. I'm sorry. We have a note in here from family expressing some concern. I turned my head toward Melissa. Melissa looked at Kyle, and before either of us could speak, Kyle did. Nothing major, he said, easy as breath. She just gets mixed up sometimes, especially with bills and appointments. We're trying to stay ahead of it. The nurse shifted uncomfortably. I said very clearly, I have never told anyone I was getting confused. Kyle laughed like we were all making too much of it. Nora, it's not a big deal. We're just being careful. Nora, not Mom, not Ms. Bennett, not even the fake soft version of my name he used when other people were around. Just Nora, like I was the difficult one in the room. I let the appointment finish. I let the doctor talk. I let the nurse note the correction. But the whole drive home I sat in the back seat watching the desert blur past and thinking the same thing over and over. He had started a file on me. Not literally. Not a real file in a drawer, but the beginning of one. A trail. Words in places that counted. Words I did not put there. That night I asked Melissa in the kitchen, why did the nurse think I was getting confused? She was rinsing plates. She did not turn around right away. Kyle was just trying to make sure they knew to keep an eye on things. On what things? She shrugged too quickly. Mom, you forget stuff sometimes. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. I'm 72, Melissa. I misplace reading glasses. I do not forget my own mind. She finally turned then, looking already tired of a fight she had not technically admitted was happening. You know how he is, she said. That sentence angered me more than if she'd defended him outright. Because you know how he is what people say when they've normalized somebody else's damage so completely, they expect you to adapt to it too. I said, that's not an answer. She folded the dish towel slowly and said, he worries. He thinks ahead. He just doesn't always say it well. That was Melissa all over. Translation instead of truth. I let it drop. Not because I believed her, because I had started paying attention. When you've spent as long around legal paperwork as I have, you develop certain reflexes. You stop asking whether people are technically being nice. You start asking where their names appear, what permissions exist, who is being listed, who is being copied, what assumptions are being planted in systems before anyone talks openly about them. After the cardiology appointment, I began noticing more. A patient portal password that no longer worked, a pharmacy text about a refill I hadn't requested, a bank envelope already slit open on the counter, a utility call where the rep cheerfully informed me, "Your daughter updated the contact preferences last month." That one made me sit down. I had never agreed to that. Then came the debit card. One Thursday, I asked Melissa where my bank card was because I needed to stop by the branch after lunch. She said, "Kyle took it to get groceries." I just looked at her. "He said your knees were bothering you," she added. "He was helping." He took my debit card without asking. "It's the house account, Mom." That was the first time I heard the phrase house account said, like it belonged to some shared little republic they had formed inside my walls. The actual proof showed up in my printer. Kyle had turned my old office into his workspace, which meant my desk, my chair, my cabinet, and my printer all slowly became stuff in the room where Kyle worked. One afternoon, he left in a hurry to take a call outside. Pages sat in the output tray. I glanced down because I saw my address. Then I kept reading because I saw my name. The top document was a partially completed online template for a durable power of attorney. My information was already filled in. No signature yet, no witness block completed, no notarization, not official, but not innocent. Under that was something worse in its own way, a printed worksheet from some lender site about a home equity line, property estimate, available equity, monthly debt comparison, no final application, no submitted confirmation number, just enough to tell me somebody had moved from fantasy into planning. My house, my equity, my age, all laid out in black ink on a tray next to the printer I had bought myself 12 years earlier. I picked up the pages and felt something very cold and very calm settle into place inside me. This was no longer one rude man overstepping. This was a structure, medical notes, bank contacts, my card, the power of attorney template, the equity worksheet, and through all of it, my daughter smoothing every edge so that by the time I objected, I would sound dramatic. I put the papers back exactly where they had been. Then I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and made a list. What had they touched? What had they changed? What had I signed in the past year that I had been too trusting to examine properly? What had Melissa framed as backup, or just in case, or so this is easier later? By the time I finished, I knew two things. First, I was late. Second, I was not too late. Those are not the same thing. The next morning, I called Martin Adler. Martin had been the younger attorney at our firm years ago. He was older now, white-haired, a little slower physically, sharper than ever otherwise. He answered on the second ring. "Nora?" "Yes." "You sound steady," he said. "That usually means trouble." "It is." I met him at his office that afternoon with copies of everything I had gathered so far. He read in silence for several minutes, flipping pages slowly. Then he asked, "Have you signed any actual power of attorney documents?" Not knowingly. That's not what I asked. That made me think harder. After a vertigo episode the year before, Melissa had taken me to the bank to put simple backup in place. I remembered adding her as an authorized contact on the household checking and letting her have a supplementary card for errands, if you ever need me to run things. At the clinic, I had signed a limited release so she could speak to a doctor during a minor procedure if I was under sedation. Nothing broader than that. No formal POA, no trust changes, no deed, no guardianship petition. Martin nodded. So they're laying track, he said. Not driving the train yet. That was my read. Good. Then we move before they get bolder. He laid it out step by step. First, an independent medical evaluation documenting that I was fully competent. Second, revoke anything that didn't need to exist. Supplemental access, contact preferences, releases, portal permissions, all of it. Third, lock down the financial side, new passwords, new alerts, in-person confirmations, credit freeze, private reserve account, written notice to institutions. Fourth, terminate occupancy properly. No melodrama, no lockouts, no screaming scene at the front door. Written notice, timeline, procedure. Can I change the locks right now? I asked. No, he said immediately. And don't make me regret how much I like you. I smiled despite myself. That was why I had trusted him at work for so many years. Martin never confused justice with theatrics. Then what do I do tonight? Nothing obvious, he said. You go home. You act normal. You don't confront them before the systems are clean. People like him do their best work in the time between accusation and restriction. That was exactly right. For the next 8 days, I became the kind of old woman men like Kyle always underestimate. Slow-moving, quiet, tired-looking, mild. I let him explain things to me I already understood. I let Melissa remind me about appointments I had written down myself. I nodded at just enough nonsense to keep them from feeling rushed. Meanwhile, I worked. I met a geriatric specialist through Martin's referral network and went alone. Memory, orientation, financial reasoning, medication management, executive functioning. I answered every question clearly and left with formal documentation of full decision-making capacity. I went to the bank in person with Martin's written instructions. Melissa was removed as primary contact. The supplementary debit card was canceled. Online credentials were reset in front of me. Statement delivery was changed. Alerts went only to my phone and email. A second account was opened and funded quietly. I did the same cleanup at the clinic, the pharmacy, my insurance provider, and the utility accounts. Everywhere I went, I brought ID, paperwork, and a voice that did not wander. It was shocking how easy some of it had been for them to change. It was equally shocking how easy it was to change back once I showed up with the right documents and the right tone. The only thing I did not do yet was serve the notice. That came last, because I wanted every exit closed before Kyle realized the hallway had changed. The final proof came from his own mouth. 3 nights before Martin moved on the occupancy notice, I woke just after midnight and went to the kitchen for water. The lights were off except for the glow over the stove. The back slider was cracked open. Kyle was on the patio talking on his phone. "I'm telling you," he said, low and angry. "Once we get authority, the house solves everything." I stood still in the dark. A pause. "No, not now," I said after the paperwork's in place. Another pause. Then, even lower. "She's already slipping. Melissa's halfway there." That was enough. The next morning I called Martin and said, "Move." The notice was served on a Thursday afternoon. I was not home. That was deliberate. Martin had a process server deliver it, and one of his associates nearby in case Kyle performed for the neighborhood. My phone started blowing up before the server was likely even back in his car. Melissa first, then Kyle, then Melissa again, then a text from Martin's associate. Service complete. No physical incident. I let the calls ring out. 10 minutes later, I called my daughter back. She answered sobbing. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Protecting myself. It says our permission to stay has been terminated. It says 30 days. Yes. You can't do this out of nowhere." Out of nowhere. I leaned back in Martin's office chair. and looked out the window at the parking lot. "Melissa," I said, "this did not come out of nowhere. It came after years of your husband speaking for me, touching my finances, talking to doctors as if he represented me, and preparing paperwork he had no business preparing." There was silence. Then she said, smaller now, "He was trying to keep things organized." "No," I said. "He was trying to position himself." That was when Kyle grabbed the phone. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're humiliating us." I said, "No, I'm ending your access. You can't just—" "Yes," I said, "I can." I hung up before he could get louder. The real shock didn't hit him until later that evening. He stopped for gas on the way home and used the supplementary card tied to my checking account. Declined. He tried again. Declined. Then he called me. "What did you do?" I was sitting in the guest chair at Martin's office finishing paperwork when he rang, and I decided to answer. "I revoked access that should never have outlived my permission. You cut off grocery money." "No. I stopped letting you spend from my account. We live in that house." "You are staying in that house," I said. "That is not the same thing." He shifted tactics immediately. "You're trying to control us with money." I almost laughed. "For 3 years," I said, "you've treated my house, my checking account, and my patients like renewable resources. What you're feeling now isn't control. It's interruption." He breathed hard into the phone. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." "Then explain the home equity worksheet." Silence, a real one, long enough that I could hear him thinking about how much I knew. When he spoke again, the confidence was cracked around the edges. "That was just research." "Of course it was." He hung up on me after that. That night, Melissa knocked on my bedroom door instead of walking in. "Can we talk?" I let her in. She sat in the chair by the window with both hands wrapped around a mug she had forgotten to drink from. "Did you go through his things?" "He left my address in my printer." Her eyes closed. "He said he was looking into options." "For what?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I said, "Melissa, he was building a legal path around me," she whispered. "He said it was for emergency protection." That man has never once in his life prepared paperwork without imagining where the money was at the end of it. She started crying. I did not comfort her immediately. That sounds cruel. Maybe it was. But I had spent too long watching my daughter survive him by translating his intentions into milder language. If I moved too early, she'd use my softness as a place to hide from the truth again. Eventually I said, "Did you know he printed power of attorney templates?" She looked up, startled. "No." I believed her. That was the awful thing. I believed that part. Melissa had become complicit mostly by letting herself not ask enough questions. Kyle, on the other hand, always knew exactly what he was doing. The next week, he found out the rest of his pathways were gone. He called the cardiology office and was told there was no release permitting staff to discuss my records. He called the pharmacy and was denied access. He tried asking about one of my accounts at the bank and got exactly nowhere. By the time we all sat down in Martin's conference room the following Monday, he already knew the ground under him had been cut out. He just hadn't accepted it yet. Melissa asked for the meeting. Kyle insisted on coming. Of course he did. Men like that always think if they can just get everyone in one room, personality will beat paperwork. Martin sat at the head of the table. I sat to his right. Melissa looked exhausted. Kyle looked wrung out and furious at the same time. Martin walked through the facts without drama, revoked authorizations, updated institutional instructions, capacity evaluation, 30-day termination of occupancy, no active power of attorney, no ownership interest, no authority to represent me in medical, financial, or property matters. Kyle interrupted by the second page. This is insane. We've been taking care of her. Martin said, no one is stopping you from loving her. We are stopping you from controlling her. Kyle turned to me. You're blowing up your family over misunderstandings. I said, no. I'm ending a pattern you thought I was too old to see. He leaned back, folding his arms, contempt returning because it was the last clean thing he still knew how to reach for. So what? You want to die alone in that house? Melissa made a sound at that, small but sharp. I answered without raising my voice. I would rather live alone in my own house than live in it while people rehearse for my absence. For a second, nobody moved. Then Kyle made his mistake. He turned to Melissa instead of me and said, if she would just let us use the equity, none of this would even be necessary. There it was, not concern, not emergency planning, not what's best for Nora. Equity. Melissa stared at him. What do you mean, use the equity? He started talking fast after that, which is how liars sound when the room has finally stopped helping them. Temporary leverage. Debt restructuring, short-term relief, a bridge loan, consolidation. He used so many words so quickly that the truth came out anyway. He was drowning. He thought my house was the raft. Melissa looked physically sick. I had seen that look before. Adult children in probate disputes get it when they realize the person beside them has not been grieving, caring, or protecting. They've been planning. Martin ended the meeting 10 minutes later. They had the rest of the notice period. No extensions. No further discussions outside council. As we stood up, Kyle muttered something about loyalty. I said, loyalty is not the same thing as access. Melissa stayed behind after he left the room. She didn't sit. She just stood there looking at the table. Then she asked, how long have you known? Long enough to stop being naive. That hurt her. I could see it. Good. Not because I wanted to wound her, because some truths need to hurt before they can compete with the lies that held them down. The next 2 weeks were tense, but cleaner than the years before them. Kyle became careful, not respectful. Careful. There's a difference. He stopped touching my mail because he knew I was logging everything. He stopped trying to come to appointments because there were no permissions left to hide behind. He took more calls outside. He disappeared for longer stretches each day, probably trying to patch together whatever version of his life would still work once my house was no longer part of it. Melissa changed slower. She opened her own bank account. She stopped leaving her purse on the kitchen counter where Kyle could go through it. She started coming home later from work and speaking less at dinner, but when she did speak, she no longer automatically softened his words. Then one night I heard them arguing behind the guest room door. Not shouting at first. That came later. Mostly it was Melissa saying, again and again, you told me it was temporary. And Kyle answering in that clipped, superior tone of his, it was supposed to be temporary if your mother had acted like family. I stood in the hallway listening and thought, there it is, the final shape of it. In Kyle's world, family meant available assets with feelings attached. 3 days later, Melissa came into the kitchen while I was making tea and asked, if I leave him, are you going to think I'm only doing it because you cut him off? I said, if you leave him, it will be because at some point you finally stopped lying to yourself. She cried after that, quietly, like an adult, not a child. A week later, she moved a suitcase into her car. Kyle found out that night and pounded on her bedroom door until I stepped into the hallway and said, if you damage anything in this house, you'll leave sooner. He turned on me for one stupid half-second, forgetting again that the structure had changed. Before he could say much, Melissa opened the door and told him, "Don't." Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. That was the first real boundary I had heard from my daughter in years. Kyle moved out on day 26, not because he chose dignity, because once Melissa was no longer going with him and the house was no longer accessible, he ran out of reasons to perform belonging. Melissa stayed until the end of the notice period. Then she moved into a studio apartment near her office. Before she left, she stood in the foyer with a duffel bag and said, "I don't expect you to trust me." "That's wise," I said. She almost smiled through the tears. "What comes before trust?" "Truth," I said, "then consistency, then time." I hugged her anyway, not because everything was fixed, because love and boundaries are not opposites, no matter how many weak people pretend they are. After they were both gone, the house felt bigger, not happier right away, just bigger. I changed the locks the first legal day I could. I moved my desk back into the office. I threw away a box of old charger cords, expired supplements, and 3 of Kyle's business books with titles like Own the Room and Wealth Starts Here. One of them still had my grocery receipt being used as a bookmark. For the first week, I kept waiting for noise that didn't come. No midnight pacing, no speakerphone calls, no man narrating my life like I was a problem he had inherited. Then, about 10 days later, I called the bank again. Same branch, different employee. I asked about a transfer. She pulled up my account and said, "Certainly, Ms. Bennett. Let me take a look." That was all. No mention of Melissa. No rerouting, no soft little institutional theft of my own voice, just me. A month later, I went back to the same cardiology office. The nurse called my name. I went in alone. At checkout, the receptionist asked, "Would you like to keep your daughter as emergency contact?" I thought about it. Then I said, "Yes, emergency contact, not decision maker." She nodded and updated the file. That distinction mattered more than she knew. About 6 weeks after moving out, Melissa came by on a Sunday afternoon carrying lemons from a coworker's tree and a box of tea she said she thought I'd like. She knocked. That may sound small. It wasn't. For years, she had let herself into this house because access and intimacy had gotten mixed up in her head. This time, she knocked and waited. When I opened the door, she said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen. She told me about her apartment. The rent was ridiculous. The walls were thin. The window faced an alley. The air conditioner sounded like a lawnmower trying to die with dignity. But it was hers. She had filed for divorce. She had started budgeting. She had stopped using the word "we" when talking about debt. At one point, she looked at me and said, "I really thought he was helping." "I know," I said. That made her cry harder than blame would have, because the worst thing about waking up is realizing how much of yourself you handed over just to keep daily life manageable. We didn't fix everything that afternoon. Families don't heal in one talk. That's television. But when she left, she hugged me differently. Not like a dependent, like a woman trying to become responsible for her own life. These days, the house is quiet again. Not lonely, quiet. I watch what I want to watch. I answer my own phone. I ask for help when I want help, not when somebody else wants authority. And when people tell me they're just trying to make things easier, I ask the only question that matters. For whom? Because that's the question older people get trained not to ask. We're told to be grateful, flexible, accommodating, easy to manage. We're told that age naturally means surrender. It doesn't. There is help, there is replacement, there is care, and there is quiet erasure. I know the difference now because I had to learn it the hard way. The next time my bank called, they asked for me. And that simple thing, after everything, felt like proof that I still belonged fully to myself.